Welcome to the Mormon Jesus versus the New Testament Jesus video. The information for this video has been taken from this book. It's a book by Grant H. Palmer. It's entitled Restoring Christ, Leaving the Mormon Jesus for the Jesus of the Gospels. He's also the author of An Insider's View of Mormon Origins. And here's a picture of Grant Palmer, RIP. The information came from chapter 9 of his book, Restoring Christ. The chapter is entitled Two Different Jesuses. All right, so let's jump into it. The first thing has to do with language. Palmer says, in the four Gospels, when speaking to the disciples, Jesus uses softer language than the Mormon Jesus does, I guess, in the Book of Mormon and other scriptures. The Mormon Jesus likes using language that is more emphatic and autocratic. Mormon Jesus likes to command people rather than invite them. And here's a whole bunch of places in the Book of Mormon that talks about commanding people. These examples are found in 3rd Nephi in the Book of Mormon. And here's some more examples of the same thing. Jesus commanding the people to do certain things. All in 3rd Nephi here. I'll just read the first one. And again, Jesus commanded them that they should kneel down. He commanded his disciples that they should pray. And again, he commanded the multitude, etc., etc. And we have a picture here of a dog owner commanding the dog. If one finds both an invitational and an autocratic Jesus in 3rd Nephi, chapters 11 through 28, it is likely because Joseph Smith literally plagiarized one half of these verses in these 18 chapters. They were plagiarized from a 1769 edition of the King James Bible, and it's also interesting to note that the errors in that exact edition of the Bible, 1769 edition, of the King James Bible, the errors in that edition show up in the Book of Mormon as well. The authoritarian style of Jesus seen in 3rd Nephi is also found in the Doctrine and Covenants, chapter 18. When talking to the disciples, it says in the Doctrine and Covenants, you must perform it, you must walk uprightly before me and sin not, you must preach unto the world, all men must repent and be baptized. You must keep my commandments in all things. So basically, the commanding Jesus. Again, the Jesus in the four Gospels has a warmer language style and character than is all too often found in Joseph Smith's Revelations. The only must that Jesus of Nazareth uses is in John 3:7. Concerning the importance of being born again. That's the only must. His manner and style in the New Testament is invitational. He detests legalistic religion, offering followers considerable individual choice. The Mormon Jesus' demeanor and style is often autocratic, allowing followers less individual choice. Mormon Jesus has a penchant for embracing the legalistic religious rules, having a prescription for every orifice of the body. In 3rd Nephi chapter 18, the Mormon Jesus again appears to continue revealing his demanding style and character in his discussion on worthiness to partake of the Lord's Supper. The New Testament teaches, let a man examine himself whether they are worthy or unworthy. Let a man examine himself. The text in the New Testament informs us that if one partakes unworthily, quote unquote, there is a natural consequence. The person may become physically weak, sickly, or even die. You can see this in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Instead of personal accountability in 3rd Nephi chapter 18, the ecclesiastical leaders determine who is worthy and unworthy, and if the decision is negative, ye shall forbid him from the sacramental emblems. The modern LDS Church not only follows this practice, but assigns the very building and congregation where disciples are to worship and partake of the sacrament each week. The Jesus of the Gospels taught the weightier matters, the things that mattered most. You can see this in Matthew chapter 23. So he taught the weightier matters, then let the disciples decide the minor matters for themselves. Jesus grew up watching the scribes and Pharisees dictate a specifically prescribed course of personal and social behavior for all occasions. Jesus did not like the results of their religious practice, that is, the scribes and Pharisees, so he avoided their methodology in his church. He believed in changing people from the inside out, not from the outside in, like the Mormons do. Jesus referred to their legalistic, non-scriptural, and outward rules as the commandments of men or the traditions of men. This is in Mark chapter 7. The LDS Jesus, or the Mormon Jesus, as already indicated, likes to closely monitor his disciples. When the Mormon Jesus' leaders speak about not wearing long hair, mustaches, and beards, about how many earrings are appropriate, admonishing the people to wear their underwear day and night, about not wearing a crucifix, about not going to R-rated movies, about not practicing birth control, or what is or isn't appropriate to wear, listen to, eat, or drink, or inquiring interviews about how often one masturbates, this is not the style of the Jesus of Nazareth. He wasn't a legalistic kind of guy. Specifically dictating what is or is not acceptable from head to foot is not the Jesus of the New Testament, unless one believes that Jesus has a bifurcated personality or has now changed his approach to religion. His attitude and behavior is one of looking to include rather than exclude people. An example of this can be found in Mark chapter 16. In the Gospels, Jesus' final instruction to his apostles was, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature," every single human. They soon did so, although they were biased against the Samaritans and the Gentiles. The text reports that while they previously would have no dealings with the Samaritans, the apostle Philip was soon proselytizing and baptizing them. You can see this in John 4 and Acts 8. The same was true regarding the Gentiles. The apostles were biased against them until Chief Apostle Peter received a revelation from the resurrected Christ to allow the Gentile Cornelius to join the Christian movement, and pictured above is Cornelius. Astonished, Peter said, "I perceive that God is no respecter of persons." Thereafter, the gospel program was preached to every creature, so including the Samaritans and the Gentiles. Contrast this behavior with the slow and reluctant LDS Jesus, who did not proselyte black African lineages until 1978. You can see that in the D&C Official Declaration 2. Brigham Young, like Peter, had biases against some of God's children, but LDS Jesus did not correct this attitude in Brigham Young or in his next 10 church presidents. So you could argue that the 10 presidents after Brigham Young were all racist because they denied blacks the priesthood and they denied the blacks entry to the temple. When LDS President Spencer Kimball was asked at a press conference in 1978 why the African blacks were not actively proselyted and given the gospel program until 1978, he said he didn't know why. Seems like as prophet of the church, that is something that you should know. Perhaps this tardiness in giving blacks the priesthood was because for Mormon Jesus, having a skin of blackness was a sore curse. Black is not beautiful in the Book of Mormon. To him white and exceedingly fair is delightsome. You can find this in 2 Nephi chapter 5, verse 21. In the Gospels, Jesus interacted with all classes of people, including the Samaritans, the Gentiles, the rich, the poor, and those with chronic diseases that were regarded as sinners. While Jesus said nothing about gays and lesbians, given his attitude, he most certainly would have interfaced with them. And above we see Jesus with the leper. And since marriage is not required for his heavenly city, the door of possibility is at least open for all. Whereas according to the LDS Jesus, it is impossible for gays to be there because only heterosexual married couples have that possibility. There are other examples of LDS Jesus looking to exclude rather than include. For instance, the Mormon Jesus holds church courts and excommunicates members having academic beliefs deemed heretical by church leaders, even though excommunicates are faithful practicing Mormons. And in the case above, we have a picture of Jeremy Runnels on the right, who was excommunicated basically for putting out some materials, I guess, that were deemed heretical by the church. The Mormon Jesus denies women to sit in a chair and hold their baby while men are pronouncing a name and blessing upon the child. As you'll see pictured above, it's all men with the priesthood who get to give the blessing of the child. The mother has nothing to do with it. And any parent who doesn't pay a full tithe to the LDS Church is not allowed to see their children and grandchildren married in the temple. While Jesus of the Gospels looks to include, LDS Jesus's first impulse is to exclude. He is slow, even reluctant to include, reflecting his personality. Of course, we've already talked about gays and lesbians are not allowed to get married and not allowed to get married in the temple, so they cannot be saved in the highest kingdom. All right, in his end times apocalypse, the Jesus of the New Testament does not cause the carnage, but intervenes only to protect the righteous from the wicked. In the apocalyptic violence seen in 3 Nephi within the Book of Mormon, the Mormon Jesus takes credit for causing the carnage. An important distinction between the two Jesuses is their participation in violent actions. In 3 Nephi chapter 9, verses 3 through 12, the Mormon Christ harshly and vindictively proclaims his personal role in the near destruction of the Nephite nation. So here we go. We have the examples here. Behold, that great city Zarahemla have I burned with fire, and that great city Moroni have I caused to be sunk in the depths of the sea, and that great city Moroni-ha have I covered with earth, and the city of Gilgal have I caused to be sunk, and the city of Onaha and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Mokum and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Jerusalem, and the city of Gadiandi, and the city of Gadiomna, and the city of Jacob, and the city of Gimno. All of these have I caused to be sunk, and that great city Jacob Ugath have I caused to be burned with fire. And behold, the city of Laman, and the city of Josh, and the city of Gad, and the city of Kishkumen have I caused to be burned with fire. And many great destructions have I caused to come upon this land and upon this people because of their wickedness. In Matthew chapter 24, we see a very different view of Jesus' role and participation in a major destructive scenario. Jesus predicts that great violence will occur before his end times apocalypse and second advent, but he has nothing to do with this horrible destruction. Rather, he defends the Jewish people from being exterminated. The Jesus of the New Testament has fewer requirements for living with him and his Father in the city of God than the LDS Jesus. In the Gospels, Jesus drank wine. He not only participated in a family wedding party where wine was served, but he provided it for the guests. Jesus further promised his disciples that in the city of God they will yet drink wine together. You can see that in Matthew 26. The Jesus of the Gospels is more concerned for most of us about those things which come out of the mouth that defile, rather than with what enters into our mouth, Matthew chapter 15. Contrast this teaching with LDS Jesus, who not only abstains from alcohol, but has pronounced an eternally harsh consequence for those who do imbibe. He has raised the stakes of drinking wine, coffee, and tea to a major test of fellowship. The LDS Jesus teaches that if a person drinks these things, they cannot get a temple ticket or recommend, which means they cannot enter LDS temples and receive the higher saving ordinances of the temple, such as marriage, and thus will not live with God in the heavenly city of Zion. You can find this D&C 131 and 132. The Jesus of the Gospels did away with the law of tithing in his church. Very interesting. You can recall that tithing was practiced under the Mosaic law to support the Levite priesthood and the poor. In the New Testament church, the role of the Levitical priests ended, but care for the poor was continued and was sustained by donation offerings, of which Jesus and his disciples contributed, but it's not the same thing as tithing. You can see this in John chapter 12. Jesus encouraged this policy when he told a rich young ruler and also Zacchaeus, the chief publican, to be generous in their donations to the poor. You can see this in Luke chapter 18 and 19. He further spoke about the devotion and generosity of the widow who offered her 2 mites. But this was not a law of tithing, Mark chapter 12. So pictured above maybe what the 2 mites looked like. The New Testament church is seen following Jesus' example when the Apostle Paul encouraged members to give to the Christian poor as God hath prospered you, 1 Corinthians 16. On another occasion, Paul exhorted the saints, every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. The Mormon church has made tithing a necessity for salvation. I guess that is not the case in the Holy Bible. Contrast this teaching with LDS Jesus, who not only reintroduced tithing, but pronounced an eternally harsh consequence for those who don't pay full tithes to the LDS church. And this is what D&C 6423 says. He that is tithed shall not be burned at his coming. Being burned is such an awful thought. And here we have D&C 119, verse 5. All those who gather unto the land of Zion shall be tithed of their surplus properties, and shall observe this law, or they shall not be found worthy to abide among you. So I guess they could excommunicate you or just fellowship you for not paying your tithing. And notice how it says they shall be tithed of their surplus properties. That is not what happens today. Now you are expected to pay 10% of your gross income if you want to be a good Mormon and you want to be worthy. Again, the Mormon Jesus has made the tithe a major test of fellowship. And again, if a person does not pay a full tithe to the LDS church, they cannot get a temple recommend, which means they cannot receive the higher saving ordinances of the temple, such as marriage, and thus will not live with Christ and God in the heavenly city. D&C 131, D&C 132. In Jesus of Nazareth, city of God, where God Almighty and the Lamb dwell, marriage is not necessary. You can see this in Revelations chapter 21 and 22 and chapter 3. Nor does any other prophet in the Bible or the Book of Mormon teach that such is a requirement. In other words, eternal marriage in the temple to get to the highest degree of glory in the celestial kingdom. That teaching is not in the Bible, and it's not in the Mormons' most holy and profound book, the Book of Mormon. Jesus further implies in Matthew 22, verse 30, that there will be no marriage in the afterlife, and Paul's counsel to the unmarried and the widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. 1 Corinthians 7. And pictured above, will people be married in heaven? Answer, no. There is no marriage in heaven. That's what a lot of Christians believe, but not the Mormons. Paul would have qualified or nuanced his answer if marriage was a requirement to live in the city of God. Since the LDS Jesus believes that all or nearly all gospel eras of time or dispensations had the same gospel program for entering the city of God, why is something as reportedly important as temple marriage never mentioned in the Bible and the Book of Mormon? Very good question. The Jesus of the Gospels gives his criteria for evaluating or judging humanity in Matthew chapter 25, and he is not interested in whether a person has been drinking wine, coffee, tea, paying their tithes, their marital status, what church they have been attending, or the rites and ordinances they have received. So it's very different than the Mormon religion. Doctrinally, his emphasis is upon the process of being born again and the importance of disciples focusing their attention directly on him for their character development and conduct as Christians. Doctrinally, the Mormon Jesus emphasizes the importance of the church and its authority, and that disciples follow his prophet/leader in all things. And currently in 2020, it's Russell M. Nelson, pictured above. Jesus of Nazareth asks us to follow his character, behavior, and ways. His focus is on individuals, not his church. But when he is seen through the eyes of church leaders, instead of seeing church leaders through the eyes of Jesus of Nazareth, differences arise. For example, he taught his church how to make charitable contributions. Do not your alms, your time, talents, and money before men to be seen of men. Do not sound a trumpet before thee, that they may have glory of men. Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. Matthew chapter 6. These words in Matthew speak directly against the yearly tithing settlement required by faithful Mormons. It also speaks against taking a reporter along, which the LDS Church has been doing in recent years to publicize the amount of their humanitarian aid donations, and that's something that the Scientologists do as well. But there are more important differences between the two Jesuses. Jesus in the Gospels asks that our attention be focused directly on him. He said literally in 36 different phrases, "Come follow me, come unto me, look unto me, live by me, know me, learn of me," and so forth. To his disciples, he is saying, listen up, pay attention. I'm not going to be with you for very long. During his ministry, he taught the process of being born again, and it continued to be emphasized by Peter, John, and Paul in the New Testament. The book of Hebrews put it this way, that before Jesus Christ came to earth, God spoke to man by the prophets, but now has spoken unto us by his Son, the express image of God. So that makes you wonder if we should just rely on and read the words of Christ and not follow a modern-day prophet. This is in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. For a Christian, nothing takes precedence over attentiveness to Jesus Christ himself, not the church, a prophet, or a temple. None of those take precedence over attentiveness to Jesus Christ himself. Failure to grasp this significant message is to misunderstand one of his central doctrines. LDS Jesus emphasizes the importance of his church and its authority, and that disciples are to follow his prophet leader in all things. Of course, that's Russell M. Nelson in 2020. He's like 90-something years old. Thus, when the prophets differ from what Jesus has taught in the Gospels, they follow the prophet. And people like Ezra Taft Benson says that you should follow the prophet over anything else. The born-again process and placing one's attention directly on Jesus of the Gospels is not emphasized in the Mormon Church and seldom discussed in any church meeting. Many LDS people believe that they are born again at baptism. It is my considered opinion that the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth does not receive primacy in the LDS Church. He simply falls through the cracks because of a smorgasbord of other concerns that compete for attention. And remember, these are all the words of Grant Palmer. This includes, but is not limited to, such things as organizational needs, missionary, genealogical, educational, and temple work, the beauty of the restored theology, and the attention given to their other scriptures. Of course, pictured above, we have a genealogical chart. Something that the Mormons do, they do a lot of work for the dead. There is a significant difference between the two Jesuses on this important matter. Another doctrinal difference is that LDS Jesus seems apprehensive about a person not having proper priesthood credentials, whereas Jesus in the Gospels is not overly concerned about those which lack his express authority. His apostles, who were disturbed about the question of authority, complained, and then this is from Mark chapter 9, "We saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth not us, and we forbade him, because he followeth not us. But Jesus said, Forbid him not, for he that is not against us is on our part. For whosoever shall give you a cup of water to drink in my name, because ye belong to Christ, verily I say unto you, he shall not lose his reward." The Jesus of the Gospels doesn't make a big deal over the necessity of having proper authority to do his work. He doesn't even claim that his own miracles and healings of others are done by priesthood authority. Rather, he simply states that it is the recipient's faith that has made them whole. Contrast this with LDS Jesus, who teaches that his church has an exclusive priesthood, that disciples who perform blessings and heal others do so because they hold the true priesthood. Virtually everything done in the LDS Church is by and under priestly authority and is paramount for doing God's work. Having proper authority is more important to the LDS Jesus than Jesus of Nazareth himself. Differences in style, character, requirements, doctrine, emphasis, and personality are seen in these two portraits of Jesus. And then Grant Palmer asks the question, are these differences significant? There's also another very good book by John G. Turner, The Mormon Jesus, a biography. People will have to decide for themselves which values are preferred, which Jesus is an actual reflection of God's nature and love. And that's going to do it for this video. And I thank you for watching the Mormon Jesus versus the New Testament Jesus video.